So hello again. My name is Rula Bashour, and I work as the project manager for the Transforming Higher Education project, a collaboration between the American University of Beirut, Gitshera, Earth University, and the Kellogg Foundation to transform higher education in selected universities in Haiti and Mexico, and to advocate for university change globally and through the Gitshera network of higher education association in agriculture and life sciences. As part of our project, we started a series of webinars, and today's webinar is on the role of universities in providing value-based education and ethical leadership. I would like to welcome all participants from our project partners, the pilot universities in Mexico and Haiti, the Gitshera associations and member universities, and everyone from other institutions all over the world. I would like also to welcome our speakers today from USA, Costa Rica, Ghana, and Lebanon that we will be introducing shortly. For those of you who don't know about our Transforming Higher Education project, it aims at introducing key elements of success in higher education, namely experiential and participatory learning, community engagement with universities, social entrepreneurship, ethical value-based leadership, and conflict resolution through dialogue. We started a series of webinars on each of these key elements of success, and today we address ethical and value-based leadership. So this webinar will last 1.5 hours, 90 minutes. We have 4 panelists, and each one of them will have a short intervention, and then we will have time for discussion and comments. As you may have noticed, your microphones and videos are turned off, and this is due to the large number of participants we have. So we only enabled this for the panelists and the moderators. So you can use the chat box at any time to address any question or comments you may have. Please, if you want to address it to a panelist, write their name and then address your question in the chat box. And that will be it for general instruction. I would like now to introduce our moderator for this webinar, Miles O'Brien. Mr. Miles is a veteran independent journalist who focuses on science, technology, and aerospace. In 2008, he founded Miles O'Brien Production, a production company that creates award-winning documentaries, films, primarily for PBS, as well as several educational and corporate clients. He's the science correspondent of PBS NewsHour, a producer, director, writer, and correspondent for PBS documentaries program, Nova and Trotline, and aviation analyst for CNN. He has won numerous awards over the years, including 6 Emmys, a Peabody, and DuPont. And I would like to say that in 1992, he went to Earth University in Costa Rica, where he met, as he would say, a young visionary educator by the name of Jorge Zaghloul, and they have been friends since then. So the resulting documentary that they did for CNN based on environmental practice and farming in the tropical rainforest of Earth University, that was called Sweet Fruit Bitter Harvest. It won the National Association of Science Writer Science in Society Award. So this is a quick introduction of Miles. His bio is too long, but and I would like to thank you again for agreeing to be our moderator for today's webinar. Please, Miles, the floor is yours.
Rula, thank you so much, and thank you all of you for joining us on this important subject that we all face in the world. We are so lucky to have 4 distinguished panelists, 3 of them great educators who lead entrepreneurial, visionary, unique institutions, each of them serving in a very specific way in their part of the world in ways that foster the ethical leadership we so thirst for. And a great philanthropist who heads one of the great foundations of our planet that nurtures great leadership from the youngest age all the way on up. Well, we have to think about this in a holistic way. You know, when you look at the problems that are facing our world right now, it's easy to get overwhelmed, of course, but if you really start to analyze whether it's climate change, mass extinction, the pandemic, in each case, you can point to a lack of great leadership as either causing or worsening these problems. And all of these come together and are interrelated in many ways. And I think our speakers will address those subjects today. But it's never been more important for us to think about ways to foster ethical, sound, visionary leadership, leadership that is selfless. And we don't have enough of that in this world. And great universities, like those represented by our panelists, have a distinct role to play in all this, as well does the world of philanthropy. So I'm very interested to hear what their thoughts are on this and how we can spur greater action on the part of educational institutions who are, after all, having a tough go of it right now, with students, doing classes just like we're talking right now, facing pandemics. In the case of Beirut, in the wake of the horrible explosion, which has further destabilized a government there that's had its challenges, to say the least. All of these things point back once again to the need for these institutions to create good talent who's willing to serve in a selfless way for others and to avoid constantly thinking about themselves as they, quote unquote, lead us. So without further ado, what we're gonna do is we'll have a brief, we hope we can keep them fairly brief. Let's say about 7 minutes per person, if that's okay, give or take, introductory remarks. And then after that, I might throw a question or two in there. And then we really would love to hear your questions and thoughts and suggestions on how to further these ideas. Let's start with, these are 4 panelists who, 3 of whom I admire from afar and hope to be future friends, one of whom, as Rula mentioned, is an old friend. And when I went down to Costa Rica in 1992, I was a green correspondent for CNN, had barely been there a few months, and I'm in the rainforest, realizing what a great job it was to be able to be there and meet somebody like Jose, who had taken a banana plantation, which was frankly a huge source of pollution in the rainforest there, with these blue bags that are inundated with all kinds of pesticides, filling up the waters, ending up in the systems of turtles, horrible consequences for the environment, and turned it into, and I saw it as it was just emerging, turned it into a completely sustainable operation. And I cannot tell you what great joy it gives me every time I go to Whole Foods and I buy my Earth bananas. And I think of my friend Jose and the great success he's had with that institution. At the time, there was he had not even graduated a class yet. And now he's retired onto other things, and the school is thriving and producing great leaders, entrepreneurial leaders who go back to their countries and create jobs and lead others. And this is exactly the kind of thing that universities can and should be doing in our world. So without further ado, I will introduce my good friend, Dr. Jose Zaglu. You're muted, Jose.
Can you hear me?
We have you now. Take it away, Jose.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to try to see if you're paying attention, Miles. You are. Thank you so much, Miles, for being with us. It's great to have you with us as usual. Thank you for accepting to be the moderator. I would also like to greet the other panelists, as well as all the people that have joined us from all over the world. But before I start, I would like to express to President Khoury our feeling of sorrow and support for all that you, the country, the Lebanese people, and AUB have to endure due to the tragedy that occurred about 2 weeks ago. It was a devastating event, and I'm sure AUB would be a key player in rebuilding the country and the souls of the Lebanese people for a society of dignity and peace. And I'm sure, Dr. Khoury, that AUB and the coalition of universities that you have formed in Lebanon will bring back the glory of Lebanon. And I want you to be reassured that all of us are with you in Lebanon. I'd like to start by saying that we academic institutions have the privilege, but also the great responsibility to be the force to change the world. All the young generations who will become the future leaders, most of them will pass through our classrooms in the universities of all over the world. So we have a great opportunity to make a change and to form these leaders that Miles was talking about. The young generation who will become the future leaders uh, have to have the values and the concern about the society and about the environment. And over the years, higher academic institutions have had a huge impact on science and technology. In the last couple or 3 decades, we have advanced so much in knowledge like never before in our history. It's amazing. But however, with all of that, we are at more risk as a global society in this home, the only home that we know until now that we call planet Earth. We have endangered our own existence by our behavior and habits of consumption. You know, we measure success basically in terms of accumulation of material goods without much consideration how we impact the society, how we impact the environment by accumulating wealth. And I thought that after the Cold War was over, after the Berlin Wall was disappeared, that the next century will be a century of love, a century of peace, a century of understanding. And instead, we've had more wars and more divisions, either locally or globally. And this seems so contradictory. And global warming and climate change are real. I mean, some people doubt about it, but this is real. It's becoming worse every day. And still millions of people die of hunger, malnutrition, or they die of easily curable diseases. And at the same time, we throw, as a whole, about 40% of the food that we produce. So we have food for everybody. Everybody could be fed if we had a different attitude. And the inequalities that we have seen in terms of income of people in the same society in one country or the world is incredible. Just a few number of individuals have the wealth of about 80% of the population. So it seems contradictory that with so much advance in knowledge, so much that we know and we have, we are putting at risk at our own existence. But fortunately, there is hope. As Miles said, there is hope because we have more and more organizations, countries, and individuals who want and are convinced to make a change. And here we have the Kellogg Foundation, a foundation that has invested in transforming higher education. Here through Lejeune Montgomery, who's the president of the foundation, they have put at risk some of the resources for us to make a change. And we have Ashesi in Ghana with Patrick that has done an incredible job in his university and is producing ethical leaders, and we will hear about it. And the American University of Beirut under the leadership of President Houthi, that I'm sure will form the leaders that Lebanon needs to pacify and change the region. And we have Earth University that has shown over 30 years that we can make a change and form the leaders that the world has. And Earth University also was an investment of the Kellogg Foundation at one point and AID to form a different institution that will form those leaders of the future. And for that, we feel committed and thankful for trusting us. But as educators of the leaders of the future, we need to be stronger in instilling the values that our students need, such as honesty, respect, conflict resolution by dialogue, learning to listen to each other, and care for the environment. I mean, these are just universal values throughout history that we should respect and should have in all of us. But those values should not only be reflected in the mission or the bylaws of a university, but in our behavior by our leaders, by the faculty, by the staff, by the stakeholders. We should behave with those values. And they should be an integral part of the day-to-day classes across the whole curriculum. And everything we do, every decision we take, every activity we take, it should reflect those values. And we must be role models as educators for the students if we want to have these leaders that we all dream of. And our ethical behavior should be accompanied by a transformation of the traditional teaching methods. We cannot continue teaching as if the professor knows everything, and that for the students to succeed, they have to come back to class and repeat everything that the professor has told them before in a class. And we know that not all students learn at the same speed, nor do they have the same strengths and weaknesses. As professors, as educators, we need to care for the students, identify their different conditions, to be more of a facilitator of the learning process, and allow students to question, to be at the center of the education system, to make mistakes. We learn so much from our mistakes, and to allow them to discover knowledge by themselves or through academic-based learning, such as project cases, internships, you name it. And we have to make it much more dynamic. The class should be more dynamic and participatory. And I would say that the professor should be more focused on the student learning rather than trying to cover the material or the chapter in that class. We need to make sure that the student is learning and to pay attention and to help in the students in the learning process. And it makes a huge difference when we talk about teaching versus learning. When we teach, we want to finish the chapter. When we are concerned about learning, we want the student to learn, and we help in the learning process. So our goal as academic institution is to form the leaders that our countries need today. Leaders focused on improving the living standards around the world. Leaders who will make decisions based on values. Leaders who behave ethically. Leaders who will be role models for the future, creating a more just and prosperous society. And believe me, when I mention this, or when I talk about it, people tell me, but why should you be concerned? The world has always been the same. We've always been like that. I say, maybe, but we should shoot for the stars. We should shoot for the ideal world and never give up. And I'm sure that we academic institutions have that role to make a change and to change the world. So thank you very much for listening.
Jose, I have a quick question before we move on. I'm curious, as I'm thinking about the style of education at Earth, which is very experiential, it's very hands-on. I remember the lessons that I learned from your students and teachers from 1992 as a reporter, because I was there touching, seeing the bananas and how it worked. And I'm curious, in the world of COVID, how do you do that kind of education? Is the university able to continue with that sort of teaching or learning, as you would put it, when that doesn't really lend itself very well to being in one of these little boxes like the Brady Bunch?
Yeah, that's a tough job to do under these circumstances, Miles. But we have been improving in this kind of education. But I'll tell you, there is nothing better than face-to-face education. I mean, let's be sure of that. Earth is doing a tremendous job under the new leadership to try to provide virtual education to be as practical and as experiential and paying attention to the students. We have ways, examples that we can show to the students by virtually, but I hope that we go back to face, but to being present in the classrooms. But at the moment, we have to use all the technology that we have to make this as close as possible to be hands-on, practical. And this is a big challenge that we have today. We are discovering that. We're experimenting on that, to be frank. And we don't want to give up at the moment and just suspend classes, but rather be much more ingenious in the way that we use this technology.
All right, we'll get back to those subjects a little more, I'm sure, when we get to the questions. This presenter presides over an innovative university that's a little older than Earth. It's about 153 years old and going. And it began extremely innovative in its time and remains a niche in the Arab world as a beacon of American-style liberal arts education. And as a liberal arts person myself, I always salute that because it's the best education. In that part of the world, in Beirut, it is kind of literally and figuratively an oasis, and it's a tough neighborhood which forces the people who run that university to be leaders. The person we're about to hear from took the reins in 2015 and has had a tumultuous ride between the uprisings related to the government itself, the pandemic, and most recently the horrific explosion which we've all witnessed. But his predecessors in the 1980s faced true peril, kidnappings, assassinations, an iconic building on the campus was blown up. These are circumstances which force people into leadership positions, whether they're the faculty or the students. And that is what we're seeing right now there, at persistent, courageous leadership in the face of all kinds of assaults against the very foundations of the institution. So please welcome Dr. Fadlu Khoury, the 16th president of the American University in Beirut.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Miles. I'm going to try to stay under 7 minutes. It's a pleasure and honor to be with friends like Jose and Patrick, and of course, Lejeune. Jose is also my boss because he's one of our trustees. So it's a privilege to be here. Yeah, I think Jose covered a lot of the points I was going to talk about. So I want to talk a little bit about the American University of Beirut, our evolving role, and specifically the idea of developing ethical leaders. So the American University of Beirut, as you said, we're 154 years old. We've been developing leaders at the core of our mission for a long time, including more individuals who wrote and signed the UN Charter on Human Rights than any other organization, as well as the Charter of the United Nations than any other university. But like many other universities for the last 200 years conservatively, we've been doing it just that, conservatively. There hasn't been a tremendous evolution in higher education. So it forces us to look, especially now with the perfect concatenation of crises between the Lebanese uprising, stagflation, the collapse of the Lebanese economy, COVID-19, and now this tremendous explosion that defaced or destroyed 40% of Beirut. We have to look at what we're doing. Are we generating the next generation of leaders? Are we guiding them? Are we supplying them with the proper tools to grow? And from that perspective, we have to step back and look at what are we doing? The leading universities. Well, we should be in the business of developing tomorrow's ethical leaders. And what does a university offer? It really should, at the core, offer 5 things to a student. 1, self-actualization. They should leave here really knowing who they are, self-knowledge, self-confidence. The second is the ability to question a subject or a matter based on the evidence. Someone should leave the university with a political opinion and view, but they should be able to sift through truth and untruth. The third is, no question, they're parents and they expect to have some functional skills to participate in society. And the fourth category is really citizenship. It needs to be ethical, enduring, reproducible. They have to be grounded in values, as Jose said. And then they have to be able to, frankly, replace us. They are the workforce and the faculty of the future. So they have to be able to assess things. And when we assess things, going back to Jose, the question you just asked him, Miles, I don't think we can continue with the purely didactic education. And our project with Earth and with GESERA and with the Kellogg Foundation, which started 2 years ago, was really about transformative change within selected and interested universities, focusing on agriculture and other sustainable matters to say, can we move towards this tripod that Jose and Earth and others have pioneered, which is experiential learning, didactic, in-person learning in classrooms, and distance learning. Of course, we're all having to accelerate that because of COVID-19. So how do we do this? We're committed at AUB to this project. Some of the expected impacts are improvements in environmental sustainability, climate change and migration, adaptation, social, environmental, and economic improvements, and more ethical leadership, and also more income equality. So I'll start with very briefly the question of Lebanon. Lebanon, in addition to facing all of these challenges, has one of the worst debt to GDP ratios at 160%. Official unemployment just crossed 35%. That's optimistic. Youth unemployment has certainly crossed 50%. Poverty rate now has reached 55%. When people continue to lose their jobs, we had to ourselves let go of people because of this inequality. So part of that difficult challenge is to look inward and to say, are we doing everything we can? Because if you look at the leaders of the United States, Europe, Great Britain, Lebanon, and the Arab world, most of them are educated at universities. So the simple question is, why are they doing such a lousy job? Well, maybe they're not doing a lousy job because they're lousy people. I'm someone as a lifetime as a thoracic oncologist for the last 25 plus years. You try to look at what's good in people. Maybe we're not arming them with the proper tools. And part of that is to look and say, what should we be teaching people so they can self-actualize, develop self-knowledge? And part of that is to restore a sense of balance between what really serves society and what doesn't. Because at the end of the day, what do we want our best graduates to do? We want them to discover new knowledge, as all universities do. We want them to serve the community, especially those less fortunate than them. And we want them to be able to teach those skills, teach them whether at universities or in their workplaces. And here, I think it's critical to realize that at this moment, Lebanon has a tremendous need. The American University Beirut Medical Center did surge to take care of 500 patients affected by the explosion in the first hour. Our Center for Civic Engagement is actively participating in cleaning up houses and rebuilding Beirut through our Ardi Ardak initiative. Our Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences is donating food boxes, and we're working on post-disaster relief. So can we keep that up? Or when things get better, will we go back to teaching kids in classes and saying, just get an A? Because the way we've done it for the last 230 years, and Ezra Stiles, the former president of Yale University, was one of the fathers of the exam, one of the worst ways to assess things. We have to, I think, look at new methods. Is it good to tie learning and assessment by exams or by essays? I think if we take that tough, hard look at ourselves and the way we're doing it, I think we'll admit that there are better ways to assess an individual's work than how well they do on an SAT or on a university exam. So I think by looking inward, by being innovation, by having this sort of partnership, I do believe universities can help in this postmodern world, not only to serve those less fortunate, but to develop really better, more ethical leaders to run universities and, most importantly, countries and enterprises. And I'll stop there.
First of all, before we get too much deeper into the educational discussion, our hearts go out to you, given what you're contending with there. The explosion was bad enough, but all the pre-existing conditions that you alluded to have just put you in kind of a perfect storm scenario. How's the university doing? How are you doing personally? What can we do to help you? Most important.
Thank you for asking. I think the university is still in shock, as its community is. I'm hearing statements from very learned and capable people saying this was worse than the Civil War, which of course it's not. If you look at the values, the first year of the Lebanese Civil War, 55,000 people died. Because of the depression of the economy, COVID-19, everything else, 175 people died, despite the magnitude of the blast, and 6,000 were injured, 300,000 dwellings were destroyed. But the psychological trauma, Miles, to our faculty, students, families, people are rushing to the airport in this great unknown. And our goal as a university is to stabilize that. That's why we brought together this consortium of 11 not-for-profit private universities. That's why, in addition to looking after ourselves, we're having to help the 5 other major teaching hospitals, 3 of which had far more devastation than us, to help them. And to say, look, it's not all about us. Yes, we're traumatized, but others are hurt even more badly. And I hope that we will survive as a community of hospitals, a community of universities, and heal the mental and physical trauma so that we can move on and pick up the pieces.
All right, more on that in just a bit. Let's get to our next presenter, who is also the founder of a university, a little bit younger than Earth, and he started in 2002 with about $2.5 million, 30 freshmen, now has 800 students, I think maybe a little more than that, and has prided himself on ethical leadership, on innovation, on entrepreneurship, teaching his students not just to be entrepreneurs, but also to be on the government side of things, to enable that entrepreneurship and fight against corruption at the same time. It's an important approach to education and is right at the core of this discussion today about creating ethical leadership. Please welcome our third panelist, Dr. Patrick Awa, who is the founder and president of Ashesi University in Ghana.
Thank you, Miles. So it's a real pleasure to be on this call with all of you. And like Jose, I'd like to also extend my heartfelt support and condolences to Dr. Khoury and all those in Lebanon going through this crisis. Jose and Fadlo have actually spoken a lot about the things that I was going to talk about. So I will do something a little different than I'd initially planned. Let's just first of all set the stage in Africa that there is this really dramatic population growth that is going on. It's, we have a little over 1 billion people on the continent today, and by 2050 it's going to be about 2.5 billion at the current rates and with projections. So population of Africa is going to double within 1 generation. Now, if you went to the wealthiest nation on earth, the United States, and said your population is going to double in 30 years, it would be considered something of a crisis. If you said the population was going to grow by 1.2 billion people, people would really be terrified. And this is the scenario that we have on the continent of Africa. And it is also the case, though, that population growth is not dissimilar to what we saw in Asia in the 20th century. Earlier, before Africa, Asia also had this kind of population growth. and it didn't result in a disaster. What will make the difference in the outcome is going to be the kind of leadership that we experience on the continent to set the right enabling environment. And it's also going to be dependent on the productivity of the workforce and our ability to leverage the opportunities that come, the economic opportunities that come from having to serve a larger market. And of course, developing the leaders that we need and the productivity of the workforce rests squarely on the shoulders of the educational systems around the continent. So this question is a very important one in Africa. And it is absolutely critical that we are able to educate citizen leaders in the sense of citizenship as that character of being concerned about the common good and being concerned about society rather than just oneself. Citizenship in the sense of being proactive in solving problems and having the skill set to actually solve those problems. So that's the context that we're operating in. Now, Jose and Fadlo have said already a lot of repeat that from a curriculum and pedagogic standpoint. But just to say that even with this pandemic and the crisis that the whole world is confronting, there's a real opportunity for organizations to demonstrate the values that they hold dear. And for us at Ashesi, although, even as we were planning the transition to online, just the whole approach to doing that was we try to be very thoughtful and very careful and very consistent with the values of the organization, because this is in fact a learning moment for our students and all the people who are watching us. And so as we were making the decisions of what to do, we involved everybody. We involved all members of staff working within their departments to come up with ideas. We involved all the leadership of the university from a departmental level. So administrative heads of department and faculty heads of department coming together to really come up with the solution. And my executive team and I actually stood back. We just asked questions and we let the team come up with the solutions. And this was a way of enabling our community. As we planned our next semester, we involved student leadership in that conversation with heads of department. So that is also a way of expressing to everybody that we're really living according to the values that we say we stand for. And in making the decisions, I was really struck by how much thought went into protecting and taking care of those students who come from very difficult circumstances. There were students we knew were going to return to slum areas, who were going to go into lockdown. We knew that the economy was going to be disrupted and certain families were going to have a very difficult time of it. We knew that if we moved to an online posture, there was this whole group of staff members whose jobs depended on the campus running and whose livelihoods would suddenly be at risk. And we, in the end, made decisions to protect everybody as best as we could. So we did things like transfer financial aid support to students we knew were going into difficult circumstances, giving them grants for meals, giving them stipends to take care of themselves and their families. In some cases, we gave them rent money so they could move to, a better place where they would have, an environment where they could, be on a laptop and take a class. you know, if you're living in a one-room shack with a family of 10, online learning is not only about whether you have access to data or a laptop. Do you even have a quiet place to take a class? So we decided to help address all of those things. We purchased data bundles for students. We gave laptops to students that needed them. And then for the staff members whose jobs depended on the campus, we decided to maintain all those jobs and to actually draw down on our cash reserves to make sure that people still had salaries, including, for example, cafeteria staff. You know, there were no more meals being served on campus, but we decided that we could at least pay their salaries. And these were people who were working for third parties that were providing meals on campus. They weren't even directly our own staff, but we supported their payroll. What we didn't spend money on was food, right? But they still got their salaries. And we've maintained that posture. And what has occurred is this sort of spontaneous understanding that our organization is really living its values. And we didn't even think twice about making these decisions. It was very natural. There was complete agreement. We did all the, you know, modeling and the forecast for what would happen to our financial position. And we felt that things were going to get very tight, but we could weather the storm for a year. And so that's what we're doing. And we now see students out there, some who have returned to very difficult circumstances, who are themselves reaching out to others, who are tutoring kids in their neighborhood, who have set up online tutoring to reach out to children in primary and secondary education. And so there's this ripple happening. We had faculty and members and students working on projects to design mechanical ventilators and design, you know, face coverings and PPEs, and working with industry to see what could be manufactured in country and what needed to be sourced outside and this sort of thing. So, you know, I would just like to just say with this short period that I have, that the work that we do and the values that we instill go beyond what happens in the classroom. And I think that there's a lot of learning that actually happens. And some of the most important learnings that happen is people watching to see what we do when there's a crisis. When things are not going well, that is when we really see the kinds of leadership in our countries, in our societies, in our families. And so I would like to just add that, you know, we should see even a crisis like the one that we're going through as a very important learning moment, and to make the best of it in furthering our mission.
Well, congratulations on offering a wonderful case study to your community and frankly to all of us now on how to lead. You could teach that in a class all day long, and you probably would never resonate as well as what you just did by example for your community. How are people? I mean, this approach that you take, this kind of holistic approach, looking beyond the confines of your curriculum, I think is really important. Obviously, we have to look at the whole person and the context. The trick, though, is, or the trap potentially, is to become so ambitious that you spread yourself too thin. Does that concern you?
Well, yes. I mean, when we decided to engage this matter, we certainly looked at what is our actual capability, what can we do, what can't we do. But we just started from, it's really important to start from your true north. You have to decide what is constant for you. And for us, what's constant for us was we really care about our students. We really care about the well-being of our students. We really care about our people. We care about our values. And so, and of course, we care about the financial stability of the organization. But we had to start from true north and figure out how to actually accomplish all the things we needed to do, and then figure out would our resources be enough, and if not, how do we actually boost our resources to engage what we need to do. And when you look at it that way, I'll give you a quick example. For next semester, we're still going to be online. The decision we've made is we're going to really focus most of our support in making sure online is as great an experience as possible. So we're not spending as much money on fuel on campus, traveling back and forth to campus, or energy on campus, and so on. We could transfer that funding to the online data work that needs to happen, and we could transfer some of that funding to providing technology to students who didn't have it. But it also put us in a position so we could tell parents who would say, look, why are we paying the same level of fees for being online? And we would remind them, look, these are the sort of things that we're trying to do. We also need to make sure our institution is stable. And by the way, you are not, in fact, spending money on housing on campus or money that goes into sort of the campus life aspects of being on campus. We would encourage you to take those funds and apply them to making sure your kid has a laptop, making sure your kid has the right data networks. Let us together make the online experience as powerful as possible. And so we could all transfer our focus into that. And we could buy, engineering kits that we're sending to every student who's an engineer so they can still do their labs. And we could set up, in some cases, virtual labs where students are doing the lab online and there's somebody in a workshop on campus actually implementing, and they're sort of seeing sort of a remote way of doing the lab. But when you start from true north and then figure out what are the resources required, and then you can communicate that to families, to our donors, and to everybody, then the whole community rallies around that because they see that you're really truly living according to what you've been talking about all these years.
Got to walk the walk. All right. We'll circle back on that a little more later, I'm sure. Our next presenter heads one of the great philanthropic organizations on the planet. It's 90 years old now, and it began with a bowl of cereal, sort of. The founder set it up with the goal, and it's a simple sentence which means so much, of improving the health, happiness, and well-being of children without discrimination as to race, creed, or geographical distribution. That was 1930, in the middle of the Depression, a humble man who invented cornflakes. That's a statement that it holds the test of time and is truly a beautiful thing. And what the organization does is look at children wherever you may find them, and as they grow. And this organization, of course, has been a benefactor of the institutions that are a part of this discussion as well. So it's perfect. You set it up perfectly, Patrick, because this idea of extending beyond the classroom and what happens on campus, to think about what happens at home, what happens in the neighborhoods, what happens in the years before anybody gets to the point where they're thinking about possibly going to a university. How have they been teed up for that possibility? That's what this organization is all about. And the leader of the organization has lived that experience, having grown up in Detroit. She is number 9 out of 10 children in her family. and was mentored by parents who encouraged reading, thought, and discussion, and a sister who told her to go into accounting, and she followed that. But that's a great example of, would she be sitting on this panel if all those things hadn't happened? And this is all the secret sauce of good leadership. So without further ado, let's bring in the first African-American and first female president of the Kellogg Foundation, Ms. Lejeune Montgomery Tabron.
Thank you, Miles. I am honored to be here today, and I want to thank my esteemed panelists. I miss you all since our visit in Beirut, and I do send my love and support to Dr. Curie. I wanted to just say, when we talk about leadership, I've listened to your voice after the explosion, and you've been that voice of leadership and calmness as your country has gone through this very devastating crisis. And again, another example of great leadership and ethical leadership to navigate through this horrible situation for your country. I want to say to that point that I believe we have never been in a time where ethical leadership is more important. And the fact that we have the power to transform our educational institutions to one of a values-based education has, I think, the greatest potential to address all the challenges that we are facing around us. Many of our speakers are from different geographies. I'm coming to you from the United States today, but fundamentally, our societal challenges have a great deal in common. And there's, to me, a reason for that. There's an underlying root cause as we talk about it at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. In your communities, as in many of the communities where we support, there's deep inequality in education, but also in healthcare and in economic opportunities. And again, I believe the root cause of these inequalities is racism and colonialism, and the simple belief in the hierarchy of a human value that advantages some and disadvantages many others. And racism and colonialism have formed the education and healthcare and financial systems that are holding our children and their families back from reaching their full potential. So as we face 2020 together and we see the global pandemic, and as it exposes these inequities, we know that these inequities were very long in the making. We know in this environment where we've seen systemic racism resulting in the callous killings of George Floyd and many others as glaring examples. But we know that communities across the globe, we know that people are coming together in the act of solidarity. And at the end of the day, what all people are calling for is leadership and action. So today, we believe it is the time for values-based ethical leadership. We see it actually as the future of education, a powerful lever to promote positive change in communities and systems everywhere. And we've always believed this. This is nothing new. We believe that institutions of higher education can lead and change the world. In fact, Mr. Kellogg created the foundation with a belief that education would offer the greatest opportunity to improve one generation over another. And because of that belief, we supported Earth University in 1986. Because it had a goal of preparing ethical leaders to become agents of change. And then the moment today, we believe, is an exciting moment. We actually believe that it is an opportunity for exactly this work that we're discussing today. And we know that more and more we see the results of Earth already. We see alumni of Earth who are leading change in their communities and around the world. And we see universities beginning to replicate Earth. And so we collaborated with the American University of Beirut, and we wanted to support the development of Earth and its key supporting institutions from Haiti and from Mexico to join in partnership. We were actually supporting the University of Quisqueya in Haiti and 3 institutes of technology from the Yucatan Peninsula. We were also supporting the participation of Zamorano, as well as many of the organizations part of GESERA. And what we know is that in this moment of disruption, we have an answer. And I say disruption very intentionally because many systems and many institutions are being disrupted. And we must take this as an opportunity. We must make sure that we don't just rebuild what existed, but that we build forward. I believe that when we see protests of racism and we see people questioning institutions and their old practices, that means that we can't be reactive and we can't just make incremental changes. It's time for transformation, and it's time for transformation of higher education. I want to give you an example coming from my great state of Michigan. On August 5th, Governor Whitmer proclaimed that racism was a public health crisis in the state of Michigan. Now, that was a very bold move from our governor, and she immediately mandated that those in the public health profession, public health providers, would need to take unconscious bias training. She went on to say that all of the state officials in the state of Michigan would need to take unconscious bias training. And she went on to say maybe educators needed to take unconscious bias training. And that made me pause. And it made me say, why such a remedial approach to something that is so fundamental? Why, instead of remediation, don't we mandate that our learning institutions build in unconscious bias and learning about how we value humanity and how that could be the basis for our education and build leaders that would then take this leadership throughout the institutions around the world? That is what this project is about. Fundamentally, building a new consciousness in our leadership for the future. And we know that this works already because we've seen it at Earth University. And it looks like Reginald Sayon of Haiti, who returned home after graduating from Earth, helped founded a vocational school inspired by Earth, and then became the program director of a grantee of ours, the Haiti Developmental Institute, and helped a large collaborative community develop a community development plan. It also looks like Juan Carlos Perez Luma, who grew up speaking only Tzotzil, an indigenous Mexican language, then sold bread to put himself through school. And while at Earth, he developed a cocoa bean dryer. And now he hopes to open a cocoa business in Mexico, paying farmers a fair wage and training them on sustainable and efficient farming practices. So these principles of community engagement, principles of leadership, and racial equity are at the core of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. You heard it as Mr. Kellogg gave us guidance when he created this institution. They're so fundamental to us that we call this our DNA. And they're also so closely aligned with the earth elements as well. And I also believe they're aligned very greatly with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those around partnerships, equality, and of course, number 4, quality education. And now we must achieve these goals. And the only way we can achieve these goals is to teach these goals. And so in this time of disruption, where we have the opportunity to transform education, let's turn the universities into ethical enterprises that produce global citizens ready to create a world where every child thrives. I'm honored to be a part of this partnership, and I'm ready to be a part of the disruption and the transformation that moves us all forward. Thank you so much.
Wow, beautiful words. You got me a little misty there, Lejeune. Very nicely put. Wow. I don't know how to, as you were speaking, I was thinking of the expression, the quote from Rahm Emanuel, never waste a good crisis. I love that expression. And I really believe that. I think we are in one of those moments where we can make real change, fundamental change. And, part of it is I can just tell the kind of conversations I'm having as a privileged white guy with my friends who are minorities. And they're different conversations than we've ever had in our lives. They're much more honest about race. And I think it's opened up a level of honesty we haven't had before. But what I worry about, specific to this conversation here, is that universities play such a key role in these movements. They always have. And the kids are at home. How worried are you that the confluence of these events, along with the pandemic, might stand in the way of that crystallization of kind of a new world order? I can tell you're an optimistic person, but it worries me a little bit that the pandemic might provide, at the very least, a speed bump to all this.
I think you're right, Miles, and I use the phrase "never let a good crisis go to waste" quite often as well. And I do know that our universities are distracted right now, and where we tend to go for creativity and innovation, I think they are going back to fundamentals and looking at issues to keep their doors open. So I do think we're going to have to work extra hard as they are responding to build that innovation and creativity into this moment, and remind us that I think one distinguishing advantage moving forward is to build back something that's distinctive, something that would create the kind of demand where students will believe that they're getting value from the gathering, whether virtually or in person. And so that's, as I have spoken with university presidents, I try to help them reimagine what that new reality could be. One of the things that we also support very heavily is the concept of healing, racial healing, and how you build relationships that are built on truth-telling, but building trust among people. And I believe that universities can be that place for healing, along with building ethical leadership. And so I think this is a moment to really think what values we want to instill in our next generation of leaders.
Excellent. All right, we're going to get to your questions out there. We have a few of them that have been coming in, thanks to Rula's help. And but I have one question for our three presidents, and we'll start with Jose, since he began the discussion. But it's the same question. We live in a time of populist leaders, and I use air quotes on leaders for many of them. Populist demagogues might be a better term in many cases. And one of their core philosophies is anti-intellectual, anti-science. It goes against the grain of everything your universities stand for. To what extent that has taken root in some quarters? Now, maybe this is something more that's happening in the United States and less so in Costa Rica and in Lebanon and in Ghana. I hope that is true. But to what extent does that undermine or diminish the role that universities can play in producing great leaders if, in fact, the products of these universities are looked down upon by populist leaders and their followers? Jose, you go ahead.
I must start by saying that Patrick lost power in Ghana, so he just wrote that he's trying to get back, but you can see that he's not in the panel. Well, that's a tough question, but I think that what's happening is that we have moved towards a world of trying to look for our own benefit. I don't know whether we at the universities have encouraged that that the benefit is our own benefit only, not the benefit of the society. And our politicians, for some reason, have disregarded science lately. And especially at this point where there is, in this crisis, we are more concerned about our political interest than the well-being of the society. I'm concerned even about democracy in the way that is being handled now, that we don't even to other people's arguments, we just reject the arguments. And I think we want to impose our own. And maybe and this again, I have faith in the universities that if we bring back those kind of values of respect for other opinions, for that the world, that this is the only home that we have, that we are one society. We don't think that way. We think, okay, if I get the vaccination if they invented it, it will be only for my country and my people. I don't care for the rest. I mean, that's not the way that we should think or even act. And I think that as these young people come to our universities, if we could instill those, let's call it values or awareness that we are one society, one family, that we should help each other, that the benefit of others is our benefit, that happiness is not only material goods. I mean, money is important, material goods is important, but having someone that comes and hugs you and tells you thank you, like, I'm going to talk about myself, having the privilege of parents saying, thank you for allowing my kid to go to school. I mean, that's worth it. I don't know how many millions, but we don't promote that. And I think that we should go back to more spiritual things, more concern about our well-being, about happiness in terms of love, of care, of unity. But have you noticed that we have never mentioned the word love in education and business? Like if it's a banned word, and love is the greatest of all values. If you love you are honest, if you love, you are generous, if you love, you don't deceive people. So I may be too idealistic, but I think that we have lost that spiritual part in us. And it becomes more difficult in a world where we are just struggling for everybody running to get more resources without considering that there are other things that are important. And we can see it in our leaders. So our role and what I have shared with the other presidents and Lejeune in terms of how we can change the world is that there is nothing or there is nobody with better opportunities than universities. If we all believe in this change, there is nobody better than us that in 4 to 5 years, eventually we can, obviously this comes from the house, from the home, but we can strengthen those conditions so that those leaders that you're talking about will disappear one day, and we can talk about the real joy of life, the real meaning of life.
Jose, very well put. Fadlu, what are your thoughts on anti-intellectual thinking, anti-science, anti-fact, and to what extent does that make it harder for the graduates of your university to lead in an ethical way, or to lead at all for that matter?
Yeah, thanks, Miles. I mean, a couple of years ago, Jose was there. This was the topic of my graduation address, which is basically saying our struggle today at university is not right versus left, communism versus capitalism. It's really truth versus truth. And it's ironic because it's being propagated by leaders who are educated at universities. The United States is a graduate, and I'm hearing a lot of background. So bottom line is we have to teach something that is, Jose is correct and Lejeune's correct, is much more grounded in self-actualization, but also the basic idea from the oldest part of the Bible of, yes, we are our brother's keepers. It is not okay to stand by and say, you know, racism, we don't have any on the university campus. That's ridiculous. I remember the first year we had our MasterCard students from Africa, and they saw racism at the American University of Beirut, one of the most diverse universities in the world. And we sat down with them and acknowledged, yes, we have racism. They said to us, you're not ready for us. And we said, you're right. We have to be better. We have to be the better versions of ourselves. And it starts with admitting you're imperfect. So rather than, you know, identify all these populist leaders and say, he's bad, she's bad, he's bad, she's bad. Well, you know, all these leaders are terrible. Angela Merkel, now there's one good leader you can look up to. I think that's a bit of a zero-sum game approach. It's easier to demonize people than it is to build them up. And I do think we need to sit back and say, what are we doing? What should we do better? What should we do better so that this populist, forgive me, garbage and this racist plague is weaker, is less effective in infecting young minds, and is something that they're inoculated against in the course of their 3, 4, 5, or 7 years of university. And part of that is to pursue not just lectures, which are theoretical, but a more experiential approach. Get people with different religions, different ethnic and racial and other backgrounds, which are at the end of the day, as Jose just pointed out, completely meaningless. You know, we are all human beings. Get them working side by side, even if they have to socially distance during COVID-19, get them to realize during their time that this concept of the other, which it should be relegated before you reach adolescence to the monster underneath the bed, get them to see that the data suggests that it's entirely meaningless, that for hundreds of years, people have been taught this racially based science and social science and other things, which is completely without fact, that There are no categories which say, gee, this is the smart gene or the gay gene or the straight gene or the inferior gene. It's all garbage. Show them the data, let them experience it, let them see just how close to them other people are, and get them that experience so that when they hear from a very charismatic leader by some categories of charisma who can try to poison their minds with the argument, you don't have to sit there and say that's wrong. They can make that argument themselves. I don't think we do enough of that. I think universities have to accept the fact that most of these leaders pass through our ranks or other ranks, and that we should do better. So, you know, when there's a lousy government of Lebanon, like there is now for the umpteenth time, we don't just say, oh, none of them graduated from us or the University of Saint Joseph, the two oldest schools. Well, many of them did graduate. We failed to teach them what they should. We're not perfect systems, but we should and can do better.
Excellent. We have a comment from Alejandro del Bosque from the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León. I hope I didn't butcher that. He said, excellent thoughts from Jose Zaghloul. Unfortunately, there are political borders that cannot be eliminated. What we can educate are values and ethical principles that operate in any society. Maybe incorporate more courses on these topics. Patrick, are you, do you think about that as you think about curriculum? And do you think that it is inevitable that science and reason and facts will prevail in our world? Or is it something that universities must make a huge priority, or populism will win out?
Well, I am an optimist, and I do think that fact and reason and the drive for human flourishing will prevail, but it will do so because the educational institutions will engage it. We shouldn't assume that it'll happen just as a matter of course. But it will happen if people like us who are involved with the educational enterprise intentionally engage with it. And scientists are curious. That scientists they're trained to constantly be learning and trying to understand more deeply what the universe looks like, what the world looks like, and they will continue that effort. So that the scientific inquiry, I think, will also continue. And if you look at the long arc of human history, things are getting better. I mean, when you look in short-term periods, there's these big spikes that are happening. But over the very long term, things are getting better, and they will continue to get better if we remain committed. I think Lejeune covered a lot of what needs to happen. But as Lejeune was speaking, I was also thinking that, you know, sitting here in Ghana and looking at some of the videos of protests going on in the US, that and some counter protests, by the way, that there are actually an awful lot of young people engaged in those protests. And those young people have more recently come out of the educational system. And so what needs to happen is to deepen what is already happening in education, expanding it. And if we stay the course, you know, this will change. Because when I look at the counter protests, that seems to be an older demographic. And we saw this with the Brexit vote, for example, where younger people in the United Kingdom were more in favor of, you know, soft borders and close connection with Europe than the older generation. So we should not forget that there's also a hopeful side to all of this.
All right, we have a question here from Telemaco Talavera from Keros. And I'm going to point this toward Lejeune. Education is still focused on teaching and not learning. What are the critical aspects to change in order to achieve a true transformation of education, given that having a university degree is no longer enough to be successful in life. And he continues, considering further that the specific skills and jobs required for the future have not been invented. That's a big challenge for education because they're kind of hitting a moving target, and it's hard to predict the future because it hasn't happened yet, right, Lejeune?
It is. It's extremely difficult, and in our work, we invest a lot in workforce development, and we work with corporations across the nation trying to anticipate what those 21st and 22nd century skills must be. And it is difficult, but the way I look at it, I think sometimes when higher education thinks about its competition, they look at the school in town, or they look at the school in a different league, than Ivy League school, its competition, et cetera. I think we have to think more broadly about competition. I think the social media and the internet is becoming the competition for higher education. And when I think about where young people get a lot of their information, it is also social media. So again, I think looking at this moment of opportunity where we're having to teach online and non-in-class learning, let's try to take advantage of understanding that that is where young people are anyway, online and learning from others. And let's broaden how we think about how we prepare them for the work of the future. I've even seen how corporations now, when you ask them the most important skill that they're looking for in someone that they're recruiting, it isn't the broad technical skills. They always tell me, oh, we can teach them that. What we want is people who are broad thinkers, who are problem solvers, who can build relationships, who can connect across difference, who can lead teams. Again, I think if we can just focus on the fundamentals of humanity and solid leadership, we're building people for whatever skills we need for the future.
Well, I said here today, I am a history major trained by Jesuits who became a science correspondent. So I think I'm the poster child for liberal arts. So amen to that one. Here's a question for Jose. This one comes from Jeffrey Lansdale, who is president of Zamorano University. Academia has focused a lot on the evaluation of students, and we have been talking primarily about students here and a little bit about parents, but do we have systems and tools to evaluate teachers and how they teach and personify values-based issues, Jose?
Miles, I just want to tell you that it seems we lost Jose. He just
we did.
lost
right.
internet. So
I'll tell you what.
He will reconnect in a minute. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to hopefully, Fadlu, hopefully you were listening. You're next in the queue. Can you take that one? Do you want me to restate the question?
Please restate.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, academia has focused a lot on the evaluation of students. Do we have systems and tools to evaluate teachers and how they teach to personify values-based issues? In other words, are we teaching teachers to be teachers of leaders?
Yes, actually, I think, there's a great deal of work on this, Miles. I'm constantly told by our Department of Education, we simply, in higher education, don't use the metrics. We have very good assessment tools. And let me break those two down. There's learning and assessment. But we can also assess how effective not just our teachers, but our systems are being, all the way from pre-K all the way through graduate schools, at imparting not just knowledge, but an ability to learn. And these are things that we've got to really dig down in, because it's one of the most threatening things in the world to tell a teacher or a physician, you know what, we're going to assess you. And I know June knows this very well. June knows this very well because she's nodding her head. You go to a physician and say, look, you're great at this, but maybe you didn't communicate enough empathy. Maybe You didn't impart in the individual issues about quality of life as opposed to quantity of life. The same with teachers. We can say, look, you're very good at stating the knowledge, but maybe you're not good enough at drawing people in. The problem is universities get defensive because their faculty get defensive, and the faculty say, well, you know, I've been teaching this very well for 30 years, and here's a who's who of my graduates. That's great, but 2020 is not the same as 1960. Okay, I think most of us can acknowledge that, except in some scary areas. Frankly, the George Floyd murder, which is what it was, just took me by surprise, thinking, wow, this is taking me back to 50, 60 years. So I do think we need to be fair to students. If we're assessing you, we need to assess ourselves. And so far, even though we have the tools, Miles, the bottom line is we're not using them often enough. What we're saying is we're using what I'm going to maybe not euphemistically call a popularity contest. How does this professor teach? Well, a lot of times, if it's by students, it correlates with the grading system. So we need to dissect that part which says, you know, great teacher because he gives all A's. No. Are you learning enough to take it to the next level? And so the short answer is absolutely, we have the tools. Are we using them enough? Absolutely not. And that's on us.
All right, Jose, welcome back. You didn't miss too much, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you a follow-up question from someone you know well, Jim French. And his question is this: how does the university systematically integrate learning of values and ethical decision-making? How is this treated in study programs and the learning environment?
Well, thank you, Miles. I also want to refer a little bit to the previous question that when we started, we decided that faculty will not have tenure, at least at Earth, that we will evaluate them every 2 years and then every 5 years, depending on the evaluation. But the evaluation was very much focused on how first we were trained in experiential learning, and then we were trained in, and we had very clear in our mission that the values were important and the learning was very important. So I will say that we do evaluate the faculty, and this is something that I have some, concerns with the universities, that we evaluate and give tenure to professors based on the number of publications that they make in referee journals. And I feel that, research is extremely important, but research, outreach, and education or teaching or learning is part of the process. And it's unfortunate that professors that do a very good job in education, sometimes in teaching, sometimes are not being given tenure because of the number of publications. So I think we have to be more careful in balancing. We are educators. The universities were created to form the leaders we're talking about. So teaching and paying attention to the student is very important. And how we do it, we have to be trained and we have to be evaluated. For us, the evaluation of the students to the faculty is very important. And now to go to your question, the second one, can you repeat it, Miles?
Yes, I will repeat it. It's from the great Jim French. So, if it's from Jim, it's probably a softball to you, I would think, right? So here it is. How does the university systematically integrate learning of values and ethical decision-making? How is this treated in study programs and the learning environment?
Okay, there was also a question about courses in ethics and others, and I think humanities and ethics courses are fine, I think, as part, but most importantly is your behavior, is how you behave in terms, if you with the students are honest, even in being on time or giving a grade or being respectful of the student or being a role model of all the values that we say. If we are not able to listen to each other and within the faculty we start fighting and we start complaining without reasoning, or we don't want to listen to others, the students are going to learn from that. I mean, Miles, if you smoke and you have a cigarette in your hand and you tell your child, don't smoke, he's going to smoke. So usually that's what happens. So I think the most important thing that we have a tremendous responsibility as educators to be role models that the students look up to us and say, and maybe it has happened in elementary school to you. I still remember my elementary school teacher as a role model for me. Even in high school, there are people that you look up to and you want to follow their that human behavior. So I think even choosing the faculty, even choosing them when we are going to hire them, we have to make sure that they respect the values that we are promoting.
I apologize, but there's a very door behind me, so I apologize if you can't hear me well. Here's a question. I think we'll point this one at Patrick. This is from Alex Cantave at the Kellogg Foundation, or Cantave. Understanding the issues that Lejeune raised regarding the impact of the legacies of colonialism in education, how are you thinking about revising your curriculum to dismantle the legacies of colonialism that perpetuate the inequalities that Lejeune speaks about? And some of these issues are embedded in higher education curriculum. So can you bake in that idea of kind of rethinking the way we teach racial issues and disparities and colonialism into curriculum? And are you doing that in Ghana, Patrick?
Yes, what we're doing at Ashesi is we have a core requirement for students to take courses in African studies. And so they are learning deeply about our own context across fields. So it might be religion, history, music, philosophy, but making sure that they're getting a deeper understanding of philosophical systems that have existed here for centuries, for example. We also, and I think this connects with the earlier question about teaching ethics, that there are a lot of there's a lot of ethical thinking based, sort of embedded into the philosophies that we've inherited through proverbs and so on. And so having students get an understanding of that is useful. But we have what I think is an interesting course that all students are required to take that we call Giving Voice to Values. And this is a course that brings up case studies of ethical dilemmas. So there are cases that have been written by faculty here, the cases that have been written by alumni of actual situations that they've encountered in their lives, in the workplace, that students grapple with in class. And they don't just discuss these cases, they actually role play the scenarios described in these cases. And the idea is that in the same way that you might teach a pilot how to fly an airplane in a simulator, that if you simulate cases and students actually role play the responses to specific scenarios, that when they actually encounter that similar scenario in the real world, they're more likely to react appropriately. So there are things like that that sort of ground us in our context here, and that gives students a practice and the experiential learning that they need to be successful.
Okay, we have a question from Irina Alvarado from Earth. It's an interesting one. Do you consider that the administration itself, in other words, all of you, need to be evaluated because they need to be a part of the education? June, you're probably a good person to talk about this because you spent a lot of time evaluating the leaders of these institutions, deciding whether they want to fund them. Is there enough of a mechanism in place to ensure there are good leaders leading education?
The answer will be yes for me. I do believe that the administrators should be evaluated. And I will be more specific. We go all the way to the governing board, or who are the trustees of the institution. Because we believe that there's a lot of tone at the top, or that governing body can create the authorizing environment for the rest of the institution to be aligned around values and implementation of values-based education. So there is a conversation that should be had with those governing the institution, those in the administrative roles, to make sure that there's total direction, alignment, and commitment all the way through in order for this to be successful. Otherwise, there will be conflicts in the implementation if there isn't complete alignment.
We're about to wrap, but we're going to have Jose with the last word. He wants to weigh in on that one. Go ahead, Jose.
Now, Miles, I believe that if anybody has to be at the top of the evaluation, it should be the administrators, the presidents, and the board of trustees, because they are at the top and they are the ones that have to be evaluated according to the values that we follow. If they don't, the faculty won't follow, the staff won't follow, the students won't follow. So I think, as you mentioned, that the higher administration should be evaluated, and as well as the board and all the administrators, to make sure that the university follows the model that we all dream of. Otherwise, it will be a failure. The faculty won't follow, the staff won't follow, the students won't follow.
Good words to end it with. What a great panel. I really enjoyed this discussion. I learned a lot, and I hope all of you out there did as well. Why don't we do this again sometime? And we'll continue the discussion. And for that, thank you again. And I'm going to turn it back to Rula.
Thank you, Miles, so much for your great moderation. It's now time to wrap and close the webinar. So we heard today from great panelists, great interventions that inspired us on the role of universities in providing the value-based education and ethical leadership that is needed to prepare the future leaders that hopefully will change the world. We also learned about visions of GetShare, AUB, Shrestha University, and the Kellogg Foundation on the future of education. Please, for all participants, thank you so much for your participation. And before you leave the webinar, I would like to ask you all to participate in the post-webinar survey. It will take you 2 minutes, and so you can tell us more about any other topics you would like to learn under the theme of the transforming higher education and the 5 key elements of success. We did enjoy the active participation of everyone in the audience and the questions and comments that we were doing in the chat box. We were also recording this webinar, so we will make it available on our website. And finally, I would like to thank all our panelists, Dr. Jose Zaghloul, Dr. Fadlu Khoury, Dr. Patrick Awa, and Ms. Lejeune Montgomery-Tabron for the valuable inputs of this webinar. And of course, thank you for Mr. Miles O'Brien for his excellent moderation of today's webinar. And I would also like to thank AUB's IT team for their technical support. Please share feedback with us and encourage other colleagues to watch the webinar when it's on our website. Thank you all and have a nice day or evening wherever you are all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.